Dharmasya Sarvadharma Swarupine Avatar Varishtaya Ramakrishnaya Te Namaha Samanvaya Mahacharya Yugadharma Swarupine Sarvadeva Swarupaya Sri Ramakrishna Namamyaham Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Good morning from Hawaii, and aloha, and also namaste, as we salute all beings who are around the world, whether they be aware or unawares of the great self, as Buddha and other great souls were speaking to us about, trying to awaken us to this eternal verity within us and live a life in that Atman, we call it, or in that great self. And that's what is our challenge in this day and age, as Maya sends forth just naturally, you might say, or as a matter of course, all of these challenges that we're always up against, and the devotees trying to transform the poison of relativity into the nectar of non-dual reality. That, of course, is a specific goal, and it's given out to only those people who are qualified or will accept the challenge, rather than just live a commonplace, mundane life, whether that be in the world or even in religious traditions. A kind of mundanity pervades things and keeps us from realizing our higher goals, which are spiritual in nature, even beyond intellectual pursuits and beyond the seeking of heaven and beyond what the senses want with the ego. So it's a very special cross-section of consciousness that few of us approach. If we aspire it at all, we will approach it. I remember doing that in my 19th year and accepting the challenge right away, because there was nothing around me that was attracting me. So it's good to come to this great path called Vedanta, or any of its concomitants, the different darshanas in India, or any religious tradition of the world in which you find people who are lit up and seeking in a universal way the higher goal of human existence that we all look towards with fondness and with love. And whatever the case may be, take time to gather back increments of our divine memory that are taken away from us, as we were talking about yesterday, by a bread-winning career or a money-making profession that were started into very early in the West, and which kind of robs us of our memory of our past lives and of higher teachings. So there would be a sort of parting company with everyday life and with conventional circles and with ancestors caught in the loop of samsara, naturally so. And we would begin to focus in on these higher goals. And as I said, even in increments, begin to gather back a lot of our lost memory around these profound truths. And that, of course, can be done through different sadhana practices that are also special to us or special to the path, which other people also aren't. You don't see them doing much of. To hear about the Dharma and then to practice it, those are two very rare things. So you have to go to certain circles or certain teachers who are very focused on that, and then maintain it for a long period of time. So that is what some of us have been about doing for decades. And others of us coming in our own time to begin that practice. So today, maybe there are going to be some questions around this lifelong practice, whether you're at the beginning of the trail leading to freedom and enlightenment, or whether you've advanced far along the path and you're continuing on the good struggle, or maybe you've even reached some sort of inner peace and self-control, a lot of which we'll be talking about tomorrow when we take up our 4-class series on Viveka, the tool, how to, and Vedantically, how to mentally make spiritual progress, really without even leaving your seat if you do it properly, although the world will test it when you do leave your seat. And that also has to be a means by which we can perfect ourselves, have to be tested in the fire. So we have a small group of us gathered here. I'm glad to see it. And we can open up this hour's satsang, 10 minutes of which have probably already elapsed with my introduction, with some questions. I know some of you have, under my advice, recently read the Atma Bodha by Shankara and the great introduction by Swami Nikhilananda. So maybe some questions came from reading that, because I asked Nick and Saraswati there, sitting with Tapo, you look like lumberjacks out somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, ready to pick up your chainsaws and go to work. But there you are as Vedantists. So maybe you can start something off, Nick, with a question from your readings.
I actually had a question that has to do with Raja Yoga, and particularly the 5th limb of yoga, Pratyahara, because I'm just wondering, beginning that practice, is it good to take an object in subtle form and turn all of your senses towards it, like sight, smell, taste, feel, all of them?
Well, I think most people have this. Sorry, you weren't finished. Go ahead.
No, that's. I was just trying to say all the senses. That's all I was saying.
Yes. All right. I think I got it. I think most of us have the sense when we're practicing concentration that the senses aren't even really involved. It's a kind of a strange thing that your mind is its own sense, or the 6th sense. And when you concentrate, you kind of forget the senses naturally. At least spiritually speaking, of course, when you're doing praxis. I mean, the senses, they become pure by association with a mind that's concentrated, and they become impure when that mind is not concentrated. So the impurities and impurities in the senses aren't like the ones that are in, say, the body, but they are very much like the ones that are in the mind, and they follow the mind faithfully or unfaithfully, as the case may be. So it's really kind of a matter of, if you're specifying a kind of practice like meditation on the alambanas, which you're talking about right now, is that your mind focuses in on that object. And I think even in the outer form, the senses are just sort of auxiliary. They're just sort of functioning naturally. It's a marvelous thing what concentration does to the whole composite, actually to all the 20 tattvas that are starting out. It can bring them together in an instant, and people don't realize that power of the mind, the power that the mind has over all of the other tattvas, and of course its intellectual facility. The buddhi is as it runs the head of all that. It can, if brought to the fore, it can inform all other of the tattvas, and then concentration can be placed fairly easily upon the Dharma teachings and on the truth. And samadhis will rather happen by a natural course at that time. Again, it takes a while for a person to realize that their mind has become concentrated and that they are having samadhis, even at the level of objects. So one of the signs of that, as we'll talk about tomorrow, is detachment. If you have a natural detachment, then you're already in samadhi. You're not focused on the world anymore, which is drawing the senses out towards pleasure and pain, but you're naturally concentrated. And it's one of the secrets of the yogis and yoginis and concentrated people, that they just go around all indrawn, like Sri Ramakrishna said about Swami Vivekananda when he was young. He has that indrawn look, like a mother bird hatching her eggs, and his hair is tousled, and he's not really careful of his outer appearance. And he just goes around like us it were, staring into the sky. So he's got natural concentration and natural peace and natural bliss just inside of him all the time. And you'll notice the difference between a soul like that and a soul who's restless and running around all the time, like our Western nations are in their cars and their cities and to their jobs and so forth. It'd be different if they could do it all in peace, but they don't have that concentration. And that concentration can also lead to what Swami Vivekananda calls living intelligence. And I was talking about that yesterday to a few people in the email. The fire of yoga and living intelligence are two of these special, more contemporary ways in which Vedanta, through Swami Vivekananda, is being described. That is the attainments of Vedanta. So when you concentrate on the object outside and inside, you might want to think of it in terms of concentration rather than the senses. The senses rather just will follow along naturally. And if you have to take them out of the quotient, then you've got a problem. If they just fall out of the quotient when you concentrate, then you've got a natural solution. This realization comes from having watched the mind and that process over long periods of time by the yogis. They just see how marvelous it is when the mind is concentrated, everything goes away. And when it's not, everything comes running back, and confusion and doubt and suffering along with it. So it is a very natural thing and easy to accomplish, really. But if you're concentrating on the problem, then the problem is going to become expanded and exacerbated. Water the flowers, not the weeds, then has a very, very profound, deeper inner meaning than just the natural. Oh, it's a great saying, right? Like sort of on the therapeutical level or something. But really, it's much deeper than that. It's an actual fact that everything inside can be turned to a natural, the nectar of naturalness, as the Abhitude says. And the poison doesn't have to be extracted painfully over time. It's just a natural state of being to fall in. So anyway, back to what you were saying, if you're practicing the Savitarka or Nirvitarka or Savichara or Nirvichara levels of samadhi in yoga, where the objects are being used, then you might want to take the focus off of the existence of the object and the senses, the relationship of the senses and object, and just concentrate with the mind. If the mind concentrates, then you have a lot less steps in the way towards being focused, naturally focused in the process. And it's more likely that you'll get samadhi of objects or samadhi of objectless reality in a swifter fashion if you can walk carefully around the usual pitfalls that people who are practicing those limbs encounter all the time. It's as if concentration itself is a kind of samadhi. When you feel balanced, when you feel at peace, when you feel natural, when you feel sattvic, when you feel naturally joyful, then that really is a kind of samadhi you're in, and it really is another name for concentration. It's when the mind falls into erratic thinking and brooding and worry and all those things, or even lackadaisicalness. These are different vrittis listed in yoga. If you keep going through the yoga lessons and taking them, then you'll come upon lists of vrittis, kinds of vibrations to watch out for in the mind that the father of yoga warns about. And like chanchala, you always want restlessness, and there's a kind of vritti that makes you go blank in meditation, a kind of wandering state of mind. And you can take those up hopefully in January when we go to Portland at the yoga retreat. There's a whole list of vrittis I've pulled out of the Yoga Sutras that he mentions that are to be watched for. And they're at different levels of mind. That is gross, subtle, and even causal level. Things to watch out for that keep the mind balanced. Because when it's balanced, then everything goes well, including work. Work can be a drudgery if those vrittis are there, but as soon as you even out those vrittis, whether you do it with natural concentration, or you do it with meditation, or whether you do it with a few in-breaths and out-breaths, you just return to your natural state and accomplish everything in that concentration of mind. It's, even bliss concentrated, how else could it be gotten except through concentration? And that's why pratyahara falls just below. Make sure that that you take your mind off the senses. It's just what I'm telling you, right? I mean, sorry, take your senses off your objects. So pratyahara would be that, you might say, be learning a kind of easy preliminary mode of concentration. If you can master pratyahara in that and make it more of an easy matter, and then concentration will become more natural. But if you're still stumbling on the objects, there's some disconnect between you, and even in the sense of the homogeneity of the whole experience, then there are things that you're putting into the quotient that you'll need to take out. And the father of yoga just put them in terms of different kinds of vibrations of your mind. There are other ways of citing them. Who else has some questions to offer at Satsang on this fine day? Anurag, I see you.
I see you too. Hi.
Hello. Hello. Hello, dearie.
Nice to see you. Getting back to Raja Yoga, since we started on that, I've been rereading Raja Yoga, and I came across a section where I can't believe I never really remembered it or noticed it before, but where Swamiji's talking about dhyan, and he talks about imagining a lotus on the top of the head. He says that virtue is its center and knowledge is its stalk, and the 8 petals of the lotus are the 8 powers of the yogi. Can you speak a little bit about that and how to use that? What are the 8 powers, if you can recall them, and how would one use that particular meditation, practically speaking, in meditation, to use that as an aid or as a method?
Well, it's almost impossible, I think, at least philosophically, to separate yoga from Kundalini yoga. That's probably why Sri Ramakrishna said that no spiritual growth will be had unless one can awaken Kundalini. So although it wasn't Patanjali's specific name for yoga, he was going for the Ashtanga, more ordered, stepwise, step inward wise, because of course if he's following the teachings of Lord Kapila and the 24 cosmic principles, then those move inward gradually from outward to inward. So since the seer has become attached to the seen, he said, then we have to reverse that process. So we have to start from where we are, which is the seen, or sometimes I say rather obscene in the case of some people. But you have to start from what you see and then move inwards gradually by levels or by limbs or by avastas, Sri Ramakrishna said, stages of consciousness. And you master them one at a time, and then you go past them. You put them as a part of your arsenal. So in that way, it's sort of like these powers that are associated with the chakras and the lotus. I think Swami's Vivekananda's commentary is bringing in more of the Kundalini, because of course he was right there with Sri Ramakrishna, who was the hidden Kundalini master of the age and having all the experiences himself. So I came upon some similar teachings when, of course, I'm always coming upon them, but the other day when it was just in how much power there is in the root chakra alone for an illumined soul. If they return to the root chakra, there's a huge amount of power there to be tapped. And most people are thinking about, oh, I have to get beyond the lower chakra and into beyond the chakra at the Manipura level and so forth, beyond my ancestors. And those are all for people who are still accumulating these powers that the yogi has. But for the person who's already awakened and coming back down the staircase, like breathing in and then breathing out, as Vivekananda would tell us at the beginning of the Raja Yoga book, then they're really gathering these forces at all levels to use at those levels. And some of them will benefit the soul itself, and some of it will be used to benefit others, if the soul is so inclined. So those are, I mean, really, here's the first volume of yoga book, and the second one will be about the same thick, but this is the course that all of you took from 2005 to 2015, and it'll be put in a book form soon, and we'll have 2 volumes. So 2 footfalls here is basically what it is, with far less charts, of course. But these are all your questions and answers and various experiment of some 100 people I put on a list that took this course throughout the 10 years. And a marvel to me, among other marvels, is I don't have it here right now, but taking all the Yoga Sutras out of the main mix of those 2 volumes and putting them all in one 3 or 4 page list, and then just reading them out loud to myself or reading them quietly to myself. Really wonderful is to read the sutras by themselves, and I realized that we're not doing that. Basically, all the volumes are mixed in, sloka, sutra by sutra, with commentaries after each. So you never really get a sense of how all the Yoga Sutras read when you read all 4 padas inside of 20 minutes. Usually it's the other way that you want students or people to do that, is to take their time with it. But then you lose out that really precious thing of reading it all at once, like taking a poem and reading it all at once, and then going back and looking at each one of the different lines of the poem and analyzing it. So there are really 2 ways to come at it, at least. And this one way of reading all the Yoga Sutras down is another wonderful thing that's So I put that in this book. I put the whole list of the sutras so that people can get a feel for the whole flow of the sutras. And that's where you'll find those teachings on samyama that you're just mentioning, all the powers of the yogi and how they use samyama after they've mastered the 8 limbs, or come pretty close to mastering them all, if they ever can be mastered, depending on what you mean by the term. But they're always using samyama, and there must be, a series of several dozen slokas on samyama alone, which is a special kind of concentration that gets used after you learn how to concentrate and meditate. So, it's a very beautiful thing. And if you want to use metaphorically the stalk of the lotus and the petal, the flowers and the petals, that's been typical of Indian culture and philosophy to use that metaphor. Sort of like we think of the chariot or we think of the lotus. You can't help but think of India's philosophical systems. There are certain images that just are in line with spiritual life and all of that. So yeah, these powers that come, some of them are, of course, of the occult nature, and so they would need to be kept an eye upon. And Father of Yoga didn't really have a lot of, well, he did mention a few times how the occult powers are misleading, and they have to be used only after certain attainments in the limbs of yoga had been gained. But for the most part, he's not as careful about them as some other systems are. Of course, some systems allow for them completely and just say, well, those are things that you have to attain. And but they look different. I think the point is they look completely different on a luminary than they do on an adept, and then further that they do on a beginner. And they appear completely different, and they come at different levels of effectivity or danger or risk, as the case may be. Who else has an offering today?
Babaji, can you plug this in?
Nick, hi.
I'm just wondering if in moments of kind of losing sight of this knowledge and practice, can immense love for Kali or whoever your ideal is do the same benefit as the knowledge or practice? Like if you're just feeling that love in your heart for Kali, but you're not necessarily aware of any of the other knowledge that you have, but you have that love still, can that sustain as well as the knowledge does?
Yes, people fall back on that and naturally go to that in times of gunic cycles or karmas surfacing or trials and problems in the world. People will definitely, you might say, default to that, but it's like Sri Ramakrishna is saying that there are 2 different kinds of devotees. There's the kitten devotee and there's the monkey devotee. And so the monkey always clings to its mother all the time and won't let go. And the kitten is just totally dependent on the mother, but the mother will put it someplace and leave it, and it'll just mew, mew, mew until, and have faith that the mother's coming back for it. So he used to notice the difference between different characters or temperaments of devotees and class them widely like that. And so it brings up, in answer to your question, difference between a person who's a little bit more self-reliant and is maybe further along the path of self-realization, and a person who is still having to default to that kind of devotional practices and so forth, rituals. We notice that in the Swamis of the Ramakrishna orders that they don't have a mantra and they're not thinking about an ishtam. They're far along the path of realization now, and they're depending upon what? Themselves, the Atman, which is all the rave in Vedanta. There's nothing more to the point than realizing the Atman and being self-realized, and everything else then just becomes additive bliss. Just add-on bliss, if you were to consider them. Other people may have to spend time, and it's all a kind of purification that happens at a higher level of mind and intellect, and opening channels to higher samadhis, or to the word, and having actual darshana with the Mahat and with the Trinity, with the Ishtams in their various respective places. Of course, a lot of that has to do with the upper centers of Kundalini Yoga too, where the yogis find these great powers and master them and offer them back to Mother Kundalini herself. So, I mean, you're using the Ma Kali as a resort. She, since birth, has ever led me on through passive trouble to perfection's goal, mother-wise in her own sweet and playful ways. She who is always and ever illumined to my understanding. She, the mother, she my all, is my resort. Whether my work overflow with full fruition or with none, Vivekananda wrote about her. So you could see there in Vivekananda a person who's fully self-realized, but still has intense love for Mother Kali. So that would be the ultimate to arrive at. You wouldn't have anything to take away your realization or your insights or your peace of mind or your bliss. It would be flowing all the time. And so step down from that and you have people who are forgetting now and then who they are. It's the practitioners who are, and actually that's one of the vibrations that Patanjali mentions, is gaps in your thinking process. That's a kind of vibration that happens, or that all of a sudden it's like you're walking along a high bridge and all of a sudden part of it's broken away and you can see the other part of the bridge just beyond, but you can't get to it. So there are gaps in consciousness that are being experienced by people who haven't fully connected the nadis and the abilities in the powers of a yogi that Anurag was just speaking about. Have not made those connected and like bridges that you can pass back and forth over both directions. So then if you step down in ability like that, the ability of a yogi or the ability of an adept or moderate or a beginner, a novitiate, then you have more and more dependence upon forms and more dependence on practices and even such practices as ritualism. And of course, the problem with that is that you can get stuck there. I can think of people I've seen along the way who have gone only that far in ritualism and no further, and they'll stay there for the rest of their life. And there are people who will only go so far as love of their ishtam and will not think about liberation. So if it's one of the advantages of looking at it from a high tower. The high tower is Sri Ramakrishna. So if you're in the high tower and you look out over the whole religious lands, all the spiritual vortexes and areas, then you've got the best view. We've always known that. We've always seen that. And we haven't had to go out and say, Sri Ramakrishna is the best and highest, and everyone come to him, because all will come to him in the end. He's the authentic article. But we don't have to proclaim it. We just benefit by his high tower. And we took it up and lived in it, and will continue to live in it through the rest of our lives. How many lives will take? And that is the high tower where all the great luminaries gather. And so you get the best view from that. And the best view in this regard, meaning you have both Guru Bhakti and Brahmagyan. You have intense wisdom, intense love, ecstatic love for the Lord in both form and beyond form. And you have non-dual wisdom as well. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that she only gives Brahmagyan occasionally to people, and she only gives Prema Bhakti occasional to some souls. So you'll see some, and in fact, I wrote a God blog on that. I haven't posted it yet, but it's called The Sun and Moon in the Same Sky. And so if you ever see the sun and moon in the same sky, then, as I did once when I was driving early morning across the prairies in Wyoming at about 100 miles an hour, trying to make an airline flight in Billings, Montana, across these prairies, and I watched the sun rising, moon setting in front of me, and the sun rising in my rear view mirror. And so occasionally, it flashed me immediately, and this was decades ago, but flashed me immediately to the sun and moon in the same sky teaching, where you have soul like an avatar who actually has both Prema Bhakti and Brahmagyan, both. Whereas it would be very hard for you to find a person who has even one of those two high qualities in the body or living. But there is that avatar of Adhishtaya, the best of all avatars, that has both. So that's the ideal, the high tower, as I'm calling it here. And in the meantime, as you cut your teeth spiritually, that is, you're learning the darshanas of India, you're practicing the Jnana Yoga, and you're experiencing ritualism and bhakti, increasing your devotion for God, and trying to serve others, as well as meditate, then that's what you have to build up on, or the example you have to follow in a great soul like that. All four yogas developed to their most mature condition. The religion of this age, Vivekananda called that. The four yogas all fully developed in one person. So that's a long answer. The short answer is yes. Yes, it is natural to fall back on calling on the Lord as he or she resides in your heart. But you'll find out eventually that Lord is yourself. You're just calling on yourself. It'd be good to be able to depend upon yourself, wouldn't it, at all times, under all circumstances. So I hope everyone's hearing me and everything is flowing. We've got everything plugged in here, so I hope you're catching it all.
We're hearing you just fine, Babaji. It's the image keeps stalling, that's all. It must be a bad Wi-Fi day.
So we still have a goodly amount of time if there's some other satsang questions that can be brought up, even dredged up, if you have to go deep.
Do you hear me, Babaji?
Yes, I can.
Okay, namaste.
Isha.
Namaste, nice to see you.
Namaste.
And the rest of the team. I was just wondering if you could maybe explain to me about the bliss sheath.
The bliss sheath, the Anandamaya Kosha you're talking about.
Yeah, if you could maybe elaborate on that further.
Well, it usually helps to take it in correlation with the lower or the other four sheaths, because it's a fivefold system again that is one of those many quintuplications that are found throughout the Vedanta and Yoga and Samkhya systems. And of course, a sheath is something that contains, sometimes if you use the word kosha, like you do if you're doing a ritual, you have a kosha that you pour water into, and you've polished the kosha and said mantras over it, put it there in front of the altar, and so soon you'll pour sacred water into it. And so it's a container for something important. So that's Anandamaya Kosha. And then there are other words like upadi. When they use the word upadi in Sanskrit, it's more like a covering. So the whole thing, you can either be talking at the topic or at the subject by saying that these koshas are coverings or they're containers. It's kind of how I've come to understand it over time. When they're talking about coverings, then oops, there's a problem. When they're talking about containers, no problem. So when things being covered, that's Avarana Shakti, and things are getting masked, or you're not seeing them anymore, and from there they can get distorted too when you try and see them. So it's a sticky wicket, as they say in England. But if you're talking about something that's a container, you're talking more about, a tantric idea that, because Vedanta will go towards the covering power and describe things that you have to see through that are in your way, that you're not seeing divine reality everywhere or hearing it everywhere and experiencing it everywhere. So you'll have to do some work on the coverings and thin them out, like the coverings of the curtain of nations and so forth, those kinds of teachings. But Tantra takes another emphasis quite often that everything's just a container for divine reality. So consciousness got poured into these five sheaths so that it could express itself. And so the idea of risk and dangers, is not emphasized there. And they shouldn't be really until the soul starts to suffer for some reason. Like if you poured something in a container and the container was leaking, see, then there's a problem, right? So either way, you go into the container, like say the Anandamaya Kosha, there's a problem with the ego, right? Because that's the ego sheath. So if you go into the Anandamaya Kosha and you're trying to fill it with something divine and it leaks, or it's losing its essence or its content, then you're probably having some problem with an unripe ego, and it's not taking the wisdom correctly from the buddhi. It's not connected well with the mind. It's maybe connecting more with the dual mind and not the non-dual mind, the original mind. So I'm just saying there'd be some examples then that you could bring forth of an ego sheath that is having those kinds of issues. And but I said originally that it shouldn't have that kind of issue. Everything should just be seen as a container for consciousness. The only problem with that then is that some of these containers have limited capacity. And so you start pouring stuff into them and oops, overflow. But what if that overflow, the Swamis tell us, is an overflow of the bliss of Brahman? That the ego, the Anandamaya Kosha, reached its most ripe state, and there's no more, but consciousness was still coming at it in torrents, like waves of bliss. Holy Mother said that she experienced one day when all of a sudden she was meditating and she got a whole ocean of bliss just came flowing out of the air, as it were, and just totally encompassed her. And she thought she was drowning as she sat there in meditation. And finally, she balanced out a little bit, and then she was intoxicated for several days, she said. So out of nowhere, just in an everyday meditation, these waves of bliss just enveloped her. So there's no Anandamaya Kosha that can forbear that. It'll overflow and and bust apart basically, and then you'll have to try and get it back if the body's going to go on existing. So a container for consciousness is what you think of when you think of the koshas in Tantra. So you have to then, as they say in the peace chants, expand in your capacity to know Brahman. Expand your mind in its capacity to know Brahman. And so prior to that, you'd have offered your body the Anandamaya Kosha. You'd been taking good food and offered your very body and the deha to the mother, to your ideal. And then after that, you'd offered the life force, the pranamaya kosha, in the same way. And this way you go on toward the mind and intellect and finally to the ego sheaths, the 5 sheaths. And in that way, you're always expanding them and making them fit vehicles or upadis, vessels, containers, for more and more consciousness to pour in and through them. And that's where the whole side of Tantra that's about expression and about lila or sportive play comes into the picture. There are a lot of people attracted to that. And these people maybe aren't the ones that are focused directly upon non-dual awareness and getting nirvikalpa samadhi and leaving all name and form behind. That's a whole nother class of being. But there's just as many or more, probably much more beings are into sportive play or expressing how consciousness expresses through these koshas, or in Tantra you'd call them kanchukas. And therefore you're going to have to make them, just like you clean out a vessel for the puja, you'd, with a clean cloth and polish and everything, get it ready for the sacred water to hit it and fill it. You do the same with each of your mechanisms, each of your sheaths. You're wanting to always purify them so that consciousness wants to get into them. And it's the same with the chakras. You become aware of them so that Holy Mother, the Divine Mother, Kundalini, will want to rise to each chakra in turn. Because if there are blocks in the nadis called granthis, or if there are unsavory things in your prana, like erratic vibrations in your prana at the pranamaya kosha level, or if there are unsavory or untoward thoughts in your mind in the manamaya kosha, or if your intellect has bhranti darshana, is it deluded intellect where it's not universally minded and not seeing correctly, then Kundalini, consciousness itself won't want to infill these sheaths or these containers, or it won't be able to. It might want to, but it won't be able to because you're keeping it back. So it's a beautiful system. We might talk some about it tomorrow, starting the class on Viveka, because people with Viveka discrimination at the spiritual level are people who come here and realize these truths right away and don't get pulled into worldliness and suffering. They rather learn ways of putting up barriers between them and Maya and keeping everything in its right place, keeping everything pure and expanding in the right direction, you might say. Because it is sure the mind can expand in wrong directions. Probably not too hard to see that. But to expand it into capacity to know divine reality is the particularly wise and welcome way of that the seers practice and show to us. They exemplify it for us so that we don't get caught off track and spend lifetimes searching fruitlessly and develop impurities as samskars that we take lifetime to lifetime. It'd be better just to let all the mass of that go. What do I do with all my problems? They asked Vivekananda. Well, I want you to go gather them all up, gather them into a bundle, wrap them up in a cloth, and throw them all in the ocean. So, it's only you that are holding on to these problems and these limitations. And with the problems, you can do away with them because they're not necessary. But the limitations, you're going to have to exert a little force. Like Sri Ramakrishna said, if you keep a garlic solution in a glass cup, or let's say in a metal cup, then you wash it, but it still smells like garlic. So he's talking about the body that keeps ignorance with it all the time. Pretty soon becomes convinced that it's a sinner or something. It can never get rid of that smell of ignorance. So they ask him, well, what do we do if we're like that? He said, well, you can go bake it over the fire, and then it'll get rid of that smell of garlic solution. Or if you want to expand in your capacity to know Brahman, then you take it to a smithy, and he'll heat it over the fire and stretch it so that you can contain more. So if your problem is I can't contain enough knowledge, or I can't contain enough wisdom, I get overwhelmed, then you have to expand your mind's capacity by heating it over the fire and stretching that vessel. And then you can contain more and more. So it's just one of the more commonplace teachings in Vedanta, the Sheaths, but you can see how deep it can go in so many directions, and what a great study it is all the time when you take it up. It's just the way that consciousness has formulated itself in 5 levels, in 5 different worlds, and with 5 senses and 5 elements to go along with it all. These 5 koshas are called Adara system, a very ancient system, and one of the more precious teachings, like the 3 gunas that are peculiar to Samkhya and Vedanta philosophies. More specifically about the Anandamaya Kosha, it's of course the subtlest of all of them, but we've often we've often thought that the Vijnanamaya Kosha is the most useful because that's the sheath of the intellect. And when it gets purified and expanded, then these higher knowledge can come to it in truth. And facility of the Anandamaya Kosha would be learning how to let go at a certain moment. So when it becomes ripened, then it's sort of like, well, we can't have any more fun here. Party's over. You know, we've had so much fun with the ripe ego. We've seen all the gods and goddesses, and we've had ecstasies and blisses and yada yada. So now what's the ego's purpose is, you know, to let go of itself so that it can merge like a hailstone in the ocean with Brahman, which is its return journey is consummated then. And so in that way, I think the ripe ego's greatest contribution to the journey through the 5 sheaths would be learning when to let go, the right time to let go. And of course, that's coming more from a non-dual standpoint. I mean, there are people who would not want to let go. They just want to keep expressing themselves through in the realms of name and form at a very high level. But the non-dualists, the people who want nirvikalpa or maybe even a little curious about this, what merging is like, what total immersion is like, or they want to go beyond all name and form and time and space and realize the true self in its fullest, then they would lean more toward the formless reality and toward the Advaita. Zen Buddhists and Advaitas are much like that. They're looking for that highest goal, the Paragatam. So to express divinity along the way and to serve others, you know, help alleviate suffering, all those things come in the train of a good involution or a good return to the spiritual source, return to the source. Now that you've found Sri Krishna, you've reached the goal of your life, Holy Mother said, of all lifetimes. Now, when you return to him, why don't you just help them, turn and help people along the way. So trying to share these good tidings with all beings. 5,000 people, I mean, so 5 million people know about him now in a short time, but that's less than 1% of population on Earth. So there's a lot of work to do as far as exposure goes. So then we're reaching the end of our satsang time. Time for another short question, though, if one is surfacing there.
Babaji, my question really is even about the word Ananda, because the translation of the word Ananda as bliss has puzzled me. And I heard someone else suggest that perhaps it could be translated as limitlessness. And I wondered if you could comment on the value of those two different translations.
Well, put them together and it's limitless bliss. And that seems to describe, at least in English, one of the better definitions of consciousness or pure conscious awareness, or samadhi in Sanskrit. But yeah, I've heard people have a little bit of a problem with the word bliss, and sometimes I've heard people even criticize Hinduism because of their penchant for bliss. But I think the bliss of spirituality is, of course, a totally different level than the bliss of a person experiencing things, say, on the earth with the senses, or even the bliss, the aesthetic pleasures that people have, like they describe, oh, I went jogging and I had a high experience, or I was sailing on the open seas and I had a high experience, or I was skiing down the mountains and I was so blissful, you know. So they'll use that word for any kind of aesthetic experience that's of a higher nature, but which is still being gotten through the senses. So what they need, that's why it's good we have the Sanskrit equivalent, Ananda, which so many people are named, and they take as their last name. All the monks give up their name and they just take Ananda as their last name. So it's good that we have that Sanskrit equivalent, so that we know that it's of a very specialized kind of bliss they're talking about, which is, you know, the unalloyed, uninterrupted communion with divine reality inside of themselves. Again, that would be another way of helping to qualify it or define it, would be that this bliss is inward and not outward. I mean, you can have bliss studying the stars and you know, deep sea diving, and there's all sorts of kinds or types of bliss that you could have outwardly. But the whole thing is really pointing inwardly. And when it points in and goes deep enough inwardly, that it begins to go beyond concepts and thoughts and realms, heavens, beyond the heaven-seeking senses, as the Upanishads say, then you come upon that Ananda Sagara, or the ocean of bliss. You've left the ocean of suffering, samsara sagara, and you've all of a sudden been like a fish let out of a goldfish bowl. After years and years of living there, Sri Ramakrishna said, the soul's released into that boundlessness of the Ananda Sagara, the ocean of bliss, and feels unbounded ecstasy in the experience, total freedom. I think that's one way in which you would meditate upon the experience in order to invite it towards you. I mean, again, like I was saying about, in answer to Nick's questions about samadhi of objects, it's concentration, you know, is rather its own payoff. In the same way here, when you're looking to have higher experience, you can want it so much that you can put things in the way of it. And there would be a time, maybe that's also when the ego would let go, as we were just talking about in Isha's question. If the ego learns to let go, then it can have this unbounded bliss and break through the final barriers of its limitations, and to find out what it actually consists of. I mean, you really can't say what the experience is, because there's no experiencer left. It's beyond experience, and you know, it's beyond knowing, knowledge, and the act and knowledge, and the knower itself. They say it's beyond that triputi. So there would be no one to come back to describe what it was like. So that's actually a description of the oneness itself, is that there's no second thing in it to talk to about it. You see, what did you experience there? Oh, I experienced this and that. That doesn't happen in Brahman. You see, there's no second thing to talk to or to hear from. So that's that not two-ness or homogeneity, or yeah. And my lips just stopped moving. That's it, you see. So it's the silence and peace that turns into bliss and is inexpressible. Akhanda Satchidananda, Sri Ramakrishna used to call it. So here I should let you go so that we're timely in our Saturday. I hope you're all having a wonderful Saturday. And it's a Sat day, we like to call it, a day of truth. And in that way, we can have this go on till tomorrow's class. I see Abhinaya came the last minute again, just like last week. Yep. Sleepy boy.
Babaji, there's been a time change, and I think that was confusing for
People.
for people, also for me when I sent out the notices. So yeah, we're going to have to come up with a better way of dealing with the time changes.
Daylight saving times happened or something.
Yeah, Ramya also tried to get on.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I can stay a little longer and talk with those people who are just signing on now, and everyone else can either leave or stay, as the case may be. What about that?
That would be great, Babaji.
Is that possible, Annapurna, with the format?
Yeah, I may just keep it running and be doing something else. It depends upon what's happening next here.
All right, so I'll hang out another 10 or 15, 20 minutes. Those of you who need to leave, namaste to all of you, and hopefully see you live streaming tomorrow. And otherwise, on next Saturday, we can meet. Make sure to keep checking out our new website. I'm always adding Brahman Bites to that, and lectures of Swami Sheshananda yesterday. So it's good to join that if you haven't, or so that you can go up on it and study in it. It's really a beautiful site. So namaste to all of you for being on hand. And I'll stay a little longer here.
Other Tattvas, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, well, earlier in this session, Isha asked about the 5 sheaths, and he was specifically asking about the Anandamaya Kosha, the sheath of ego. And so I gave probably 15, 20 minutes of talk about that. And so in that, of course, we were mentioning the supremacy of, or the great efficacy of the intellect in the whole thing. And I mentioned Swami Vivekananda's teaching of how few people possess living intelligence. So we're not talking about like everyday quotidian run of intelligence that people have, the savants and the secularists and the scientists and even the geniuses and so forth. We're not talking about an intelligence that's outward going only, but a living intelligence that's more one with consciousness. As Vivekananda said, consciousness, intelligence is the first compound of consciousness. So off of the ocean of light, Jyoti or Brahman, which is formless and eternal and infinite and boundaryless, shines this light. And that light is living intelligence, says Vivekananda, and it precedes will. Sometimes some of the Buddhist schools talk about there being will coming first, but Vivekananda said that's not true. What comes first is this living intelligence. And the yogis use it on earth. He calls it the fire of yoga. So it burns through all impediments and clarifies everything everywhere they go. So they're never at a loss for knowing the truth, even in their youth, as we saw great souls like Ramana Maharshi and Sri Ramakrishna and others awakening to the truth at a very, very young age. Shankara himself was awakened by 6 and knew all the scriptures in India by 8. Well, you couldn't possibly humanly learn all the scriptures in 2 years, even if you were an older person. So he was bringing it all back from other lifetimes. So what stands in the way of us bringing back our knowledge from other lifetimes is breadwinning education, as Sri Ramakrishna has said. He wouldn't go to school because he said they were using mother wisdom in the wrong way, and they were using it only to store up bananas and so forth, and a breadwinning education. So he refused to go to school, and he cited the Brahmin priests around him in Calcutta at the time who were all corrupt, and religion had become corrupt. So he was steering us away as an example from having this penchant at a young age to go towards materialism. And instead, the parents should keep their children quiet and away from society and in a more monastic state, in a more celibate state, and teach them the Dharma early on and steer them towards spirituality. Why? Well, first off, the father of yoga says because all the wisdom from their past lifetimes will come back then, and they won't have to go seeking it again. You see people in school with their desks and their textbooks and all that crap we went through here in the West. That was all unnecessary. If we had had parents that taught us the Dharma when we were born, which we didn't here, then we wouldn't have had to go to school again. It would have. Their school is all within us, and everything, all knowledge lies within you is the second of seven rules of yoga. All knowledge lies within you. It's sort of like saying the kingdom of heaven was within you. So if you can bring it out of yourself early on in life, then you'll express all of this divinity in the face of everyone. And if you don't, then of course, then not only do you just live a conventional life again, but you run the risk of accumulating karmas and suffering and coming back for more and more lifetimes of the same. That's called the wheel of samsara, and Lord Buddha's speaking. The wheel or the karma, the kala chakra, the wheel of time. So it's one of the teachings of yoga. It's called a parigrahas. That's why you don't receive and give gifts. You refrain from that. You don't collect anything. You don't give anything away, except it's in the right period in the right time. You can read about that at the 18th chapter of the Gita if you want to know about that. But basically, early on, if you give your intellect a chance to surface, that is your intelligence, because your intellect is a sheath, a container, and it's called Vijnanamaya Kosha, right? A kosha is a container in the puja that you pour water into. So you have to scour out the container before you put the Ganges water in it to use to worship the deities. So the idea of the koshas, the 5 koshas, is they're all to be filled with consciousness. It's a tantric idea, basically, and you can't fill it with consciousness. As consciousness won't come into it unless you purify them. So, or it will try to come in, but you're keeping it out. So people's resistance to higher knowledge and to spirituality and to practice and to Dharma and so forth is evident all around us, particularly in the West. There's a great resistance to anything that they call foreign, but it's really all religion is indigenous to your soul, as we like to say. So what stands in the way then of this fine intelligence flowing out of the word and taking over your mind and allowing you to express divinity everywhere, then is this problem early on of your country, your culture, your race, your world in a particular time, and your parents steering you towards materialism. It's not like it's a problem we don't know about and don't complain about when sensitive people look out on the world, but it's something that we ought to take very seriously and take to task in this lifetime, so that next time we're born, if we're to have another birth, that we've mastered the tendency to rely upon the ancestor realm for any kind of truth. To hope for help from friends and family provides no profound solution. Don't you know that all are lost here? Everyone lives in pallid imitation of everyone else. That's just an everyday song in India. To hope for help from friends and family provides no profound solution. Don't you know that all are lost here? Everyone just lives in pallid imitation of everyone else. So if that kind of imitation is distasteful to you, then you have to strike out and open up the sheaths and let them express, let wisdom into them, and let living intelligence come back, because you forced it away, or it's been forced away by others. And so our parents are our worst enemies in the West right now. And we have to turn around and try and go help them after we find the truth. That's what happened to Buddha. And that's what happened to Ram. So when he went away and found the truth, he came back and told them about the path to enlightenment, because they had been born and taught by their parents and tended away from the Dharma. It's happened to India over 2,000 years now, it's tending away from the Dharma. It's still so deep in them that it comes out of them at the least provocation, but it takes a lot to bring it out of us here in the West who haven't heard about it or seen it for lifetimes maybe. So these are directives that we need to place our minds on right away. I mean, ask, what kind of practice should I do? Well, you can do your meditation daily, and you can read the scriptures, and you can do the 4 yogas, help serve others and so forth. But there are some specific things that we can do to ensure that we don't fall into bondage again in the next lifetime, or if we even take another lifetime. One man asked Vivekananda once, should a man be reborn? And he said, I certainly hope he will not until he can do so in full consciousness. So we have to make sure that in this lifetime, we open up these nadis, these pathways inside of us, to the knowledge within us, and never close them down again, so that we never become forgetful of the truth. That's a great risk. I mean, if you look at your teachers, those beings that you admire the most, then you'll see that they're free of ignorance, and they probably didn't even come into this lifetime in ignorance. They immediately remembered their true Dharma, and if they didn't, they did practices to ensure that they realized the truth in this lifetime. So we're sitting here right now, we have under our control our next lifetime, and that's called agami karma. So right now we're living our prarabdha karma, which is the karma that came to us from our past lifetime, called sanchita karma. So sanchita karma from past accumulates as prarabdha karma in the present, and then you have your agami karma coming in the future. But you see how much power you have over your future karma and your future lives if you destroy all ignorance about the nature of truth right now in this lifetime. So however, by whatever means you do it, by yoga, by Vedanta, by prayer, by meditation, by works, it just has to be done. And that's what you can do right now. Just when I went to Lexington, when he was in his 30s and I was in my 20s, and I said, well, we're not going to become monks then, maybe, or sannyasins. He said, no, we need to stay with most of the people and talk about the Dharma to them. So I said, well, what would be the best practice? And he said, look into your mind and find all the things that you're brooding about, and all the things you're worrying about, and all the things that are barriers to your peace of mind, and do away with them. That would be your practice. So Vedanta and Buddhism, those really are mental practices. You don't have to do a lot of physical things for that. And sometimes physical things can even root you to other physical things, like to the world and the body, and to longevity and so forth. But in the practice that you accomplish the most is the practice that you do sitting still, examining your mind. And that's not meditation. probably shouldn't meditate until you do have a pure mind. Yeah, but when you examine your mind, that's called sadhana or concentration or contemplation. And that's where you get to look at the contents of your own mind. People are mistaking that for meditation. So if you do your daily contemplation, examining your mind, scrutinizing it, and then taking out all those dark specks in it. See, like Sri Ramakrishna said, well, you can look at your mind and, it can be just seem very pure. But then, you take it's like taking a piece of paper and holding it up to a light, look at all those dark specks in it there, you see. So the mind is like that, is hiding a lot of hidden problems that if you scrutinize and find them and turn the laser of living intelligence upon them, you can burn them out. And this is the best place and the best time to do that. You don't want to
Like what
wait to the
scientists
future
do.
for that. I'm sorry?
It's like what scientists do.
In which way?
I mean, they also, they also examine, it's true that they examine material, but in the same way, it's like spiritual scientists who examine their own mind and see
That's
the
right.
flaws, for example, under a microscope. It's similar.
Yes, we should borrow the best from science. The laboratory, our mind should become our laboratory. And we should have that kind of honesty, at least the honesty that the scientists used to have. I don't know anymore how much of it is left, but to examine as the old scientists did with a pure laboratory, pure ingredients, just like a puja, make everything absolutely clean and clear and ready to reveal the truth to you. And that would be a good scientific approach to sadhana. That's called yoga psychology. And we know that Western psychology is all about looking for your imperfections and talking about them and then taking a pill and so forth. But Western psychology is very young. It's infantile yet. And Eastern psychology, called yoga, has been examining the mind for millennia and for cycles of time, really, and coming up with these solutions. We were just talking before all of you joined us about the different vrittis that Father of Yoga outlines, the vibrations of the mind. So some vibrations of the mind are erratic, chanchala, and other vibrations are like wandering. They cause gaps in your meditation, gaps in your consciousness. And there's some very lethargic and tamasic kind of vibrations that are heavy and dull and pull you down. The Father of Yoga lists a whole bunch of different vrittis of the mind. Most of them are called klista vrittis, or pain-bearing vibrations that bring you pain of different kinds. But then you can lighten them up with the aklista vrittis, the positive thoughts. And if you do that for a long enough period of time, you can get rid of the habit of holding depressions and so forth. Yesterday, I was working with a person I've been working with for years who has just got chronic depression. There's just no way of lifting that person out of their problems. I've tried everything and nothing's working. So I think, I remember Vivekananda saying sometimes people are just born to suffer. It's like some other people don't want help. They just want you to watch them suffer. And so they've got all sorts of problems in the human mind that maybe most of us in our good little lives don't always see or come across, but that's called the ocean of suffering, or samsara sagara. And when you see humanity suffering that, and then you go amongst the pure souls, like say the sannyasins and so forth, and you see they're in Ananda sagara, they're in an ocean of bliss all the time. And their consciousness is always pure and even, and their mood is always unruffled. They have samprasad, even mood all the time. A very beautiful thing to have. There are 4 kinds of prasad. One of them is the evenness of mood. I think probably Nina has evenness of mood, right? See how she smiles? She recognizes it. Samprasad, you know that word? Samprasad. And then there's Adhyatma Prasad. And there's, of course, the prasad of food, Anna Prasad, that we need to keep pure. Who else has a question along these dharmic lines?
Babaji, I'm speaking through Meredith's. Oh no, I guess I'm there. Yeah. Okay. In the final pages of the introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, there's discussion about emotion and how purifying emotion can lead to an advancement or a heightening of the what's the term for the mind's higher functioning core. Well, I can't think of it right now, but I will. Anyway, my point is, having been through 18 years of education, including graduate school, and then inducted into, into the Army, and going through an intense indoctrination there, and then coming out confused and seeking more of an egoic path, the desire and the emotion involved in fortifying the ego. It seems to me at this point in my practice that through yamas, niyamas, and the four treasures and the six jewels, this purification of emotion can be undertaken, and in fact is being undertaken by my practice, and how important it is to heal the emotions. I mean, I should speak for myself. I am an emotional person, and in all my relationships, always it's emotion that comes up that is confusing and conflicting. So at this point in my practice, which now is going on at least, almost 20 years now, I can see that I'm beginning to, or feeling that there is a purification process taking place. It's more of a testimony, I guess, that I'm giving than a question, but there is a question there. Are emotions and feelings separate? Are emotions a lower form of feelings? Are feelings deeper and less, ephemeral? And if so, then what part do the feelings play in the cultivation of purifying the consciousness?
All right. There are definitely pure emotions. Probably that would be called devotion. Probably just add a D to the word in a way, and you'd have these the devotional path itself, which is perfectly allowable and beneficial for spiritual growth, as far as all the Indian darshanas are concerned, and of course the other religions too go basically faith-based religions. In India, they're most of them are more philosophy and intellectually based religions, wisdom-based traditions they call them. But we wish that emotions, the way we define the word today, weren't as much of a problem as they are. They've got a source, and they have a cause. People are born emotional, or maybe we used to see people when we were growing up, 60s, 70s, whose problem was they didn't have any emotion. So it's, you look one decade, at the society, and it's all, they're all dead and dried up, and they should open up some. The next decade you look, and they're just like crying all over themselves, and there's just like no middle ground. And that middle ground is what you see in the middle path in Buddhism and in Vedanta and Zen. The Sri Ramakrishna used to say, if an elephant walks in a lake, a village pond, then waves go all over the place. I've seen that happen in India, actually. People have to get out of the water because it causes such an emotion, such a upheaval. But if an elephant walks in the ocean, nothing happens. So he meant by that, when the elephant of spiritual realization comes to an ordinary person, they fall apart at the seams. They can't take it. But if these great spiritual experiences come to an advanced soul, they hardly even cause the eyelid to flutter. It's just an elephant walking in an ocean. It's like it's all happening inwardly, and you don't see anything on the outside. So I think the ideal would be not to show emotion at all, of any undue kind, and just to be solid, centered, and a good example for all people. Doesn't mean that you can't be sensitive and compassionate, but probably emotionalism is what's blocking deeper sensitivities and real compassion and real love from getting through. Swami Vivekananda just say, we're Vedantists, we don't believe in compassion, we believe in love. So if we can get that real love to come through, then all masquerades of compassion, like pity or empathy or things like that, that sometimes take on a kind of an ego flavor or taint to them, are gone forever, because you just roll up your sleeves and you get right down there and you help people out of pure love. You see the same person in yourself as in others, as Krishna says in the Gita. It's the same Atman in all. And if that's the case, there's really no need for compassion. So compassion really comes in at the level of growth. And when it matures, it's just absolute non-dual love, pure, unadulterated, unconditional, whatever good other unwords you can borrow in English, you can put it in front of love and come up with some definition for that, what that indefinable quality is. So back with what you were saying earlier, and the word you gave was indoctrination, which is a good one, is that we've all been indoctrinated by parental upbringing, society, educational systems. Military was one of our great problems when I was growing up too, with Nixon trying to send us to other countries to kill people. We didn't want to do that. It was against the Dharma, see? So we found all sorts of ways around that if we were sensitive souls. It's just not about politics and not about being patriots and all that. There's what's right and there's what's wrong. It's cut and dried, and there's no way to misinterpret it, if you're a dharmic person. So you keep to the truth, and you don't transgress it for any reason whatsoever. And that's called being on a spiritual path. So you'll have to, if it's later in life that you come to a spiritual path, which is your case with some years of Buddhism and now into Vedanta, you've got everything, came to you a little late, but you've got everything nonetheless. There's just nothing else outside of Buddhism, Vedanta that you need. Everything is in those two darshanas. If you add yoga and samkhya into it, it just gets all the better. But those are almost already added into it when you start into an Indian pathway. So these are, again, the wisdom-based traditions, and faith is built into them. You have to go beyond mere belief to get to real faith. And faith can't be challenged. It's the bedrock of everything. And then wisdom can check it, as Vivekananda said. If love can become too emotional, and wisdom can become too dry. So the two need to check each other like the two wings of a bird. And in that way, then you can do away with old conditionings. It's another word for indoctrination. Is they use that in spiritual traditions more as the idea of overlays or conditionings or sublations or false superimpositions, misconceptions. All those words in English are kind of covering over the mind. We asked a Swami once up in Seattle, I think he's probably, Bhaskarnand is probably still alive, but he was describing the mind one day of a very heavily conditioned person, a very heavily indoctrinated person. He said it'd be like standing at the side of a lake and dropping with lots of boxes of Kleenex and dropping Kleenex into the lake all day for days and days at a time. And pretty soon the lake, these Kleenex get wet and they just sink. So at the bottom there's just this muck of wet Kleenex all clinging together in a kind of a haze. So that's the mind of a conditioned person. They're just thick with this kind of hazy stuff that is the source of all unclarity and confusion and so forth. And so you're going to have to get down there and stir up that mind with some sadhana. Sri Ramakrishna said that about milk. If you draw milk from a cow and you want to get butter, then you have to let the milk sit in a quiet place, but first you have to churn it. So the milk is there and you get your churn and you pour the milk into it and you churn really vigorously for a couple minutes. And then you have to put the milk away and not disturb it for a couple hours. And you come back and you see the curd is all gathered at the top of the churn, so you can gather your butter. So he was likening that to the process of meditation, how, if your mind has that muck in it, then you have to churn it really good. And churn, of course, would be spiritual practices, intense as you can get, austerities and things that stretch you. But then after you've churned it, you can't just immediately expect results. And then you have to put the milk aside and not touch it, not bother it at all, not even breathe on it. And so that's that churned milk will then, these curds of butter will start to arise if you don't mess with it. You just leave it alone. So that would be meditation, you see. Once you churn it, the mind with these practices, then you have to sit in meditation and wait to see what comes up. So this is what you do days, months, weeks at a time, years at a time in your practice until this hidden wisdom that's inside of you, that's been buried over by so many conditionings, maybe over lifetimes, begins to surface. And that's called the Dharma Mega Samadhi. It's the surfacing of righteousness and rain cloud of virtues, Samadhi, they call that in Buddhism.
Just
So,
one further thing I wanted to mention that I have been thinking about devotion and reverence. That's really at the front of my mind right now. And that by purifying the emotion, you raise the cognition level. That was the word I was thinking, was cognition. But I like your idea of working towards turning emotion into devotion. And the butter metaphor is very, very key to my particular position or where I'm at.
yeah, in a country where for generations you've been raised in different kinds of yoga, it's different. But in a country where we haven't had the Dharma, where maybe morality and immorality has been, virtue and vice has been the focus, as if these were real, these dualities have taken the fore. And then we'd never really, because we were always concentrating on being good or not being bad or vice versa, depending on the soul, then the mind developed all sorts of vagaries and it wasn't able to get to the point very quick of existence, which is to be born in a divine state, live a divine life. One and done is actually the expression. Just live one life, see what's here, find out that it's empty, and go back to your source. Because of all these conditionings and things floating in the mind, it takes a lot of time for the silt of the mind to settle. It's sort of like if you come upon a mud puddle in the woods and it's all clear, you don't want to sail your boats in it when you were a little boy, you see. But if you stick a stick in it, you stir up all this silt and come back next day and the silt's still there. It takes days for it to settle. So should I have ever stuck a stick in it and stirred it up in the first place is another teaching, that you have to consider, because there are so many things in the mind that are better left alone. So to gingerly treat this mind with spiritual practices of coming from an illumined preceptor is what has been refined in India for so long, for so many millennia. And they keep it coming every cycle. That is, 4,320,000,000 years is nothing to India. That's just one cycle, and everything's going to return again after that. It's not like a big bang, one and done in that sense. Time is going on forever. Everything is eternal. The problem with that being that Maya is also eternal and suffering is also eternal. So one finds a way to live amidst the changing Maya and to live in a transcendent way, to keep the Dharmic precepts and so forth, and develop a habit for that, so that each lifetime you are born, when you choose parents, because that's a problem too with emotionalism and things, is that we don't realize that we choose our own parents before we're born, and that if we have connections to certain souls who are very emotional, then we'll be born into that sea of emotion again and have to deal with it again and be raised in it again. Sort of like being raised, in a power-hungry military culture. And it's hard not to be affected by that in some way. Your mind, some scars will be affected by that in some way. So to live a life of transparency in those regards, keep the mind clear, is one of the great art forms of spiritual life, and not dip down into these lower levels of mind, which are where suffering is occurring all the time. So yes, devotion plays a part, but I think that because here in America, the souls are of such different kinds. What I mean by souls, of course, are minds, because the soul doesn't change. But when we say souls, we mean transmigrating mind that goes from birth to death and death to birth. When those minds come into a country like this, then their character, there's a lot more examination of character that needs to go on. I mean, in India, even today, pretty much born into a religion and born into particular worship of a particular Ishtam, like Shiva or Vishnu or Divine Mother or Ganesha, or there are so many different ways in which you're just born into that as a family, which also can be a limitation if you're not careful. But here we're not born into anything, see. I mean, because Christianity isn't really a religion here. So, we don't really have a darshana to go to. That's why we've all been looking in other countries and looking around for something that smacks of freedom or peace, at least, and having a hard time finding it in many ways. So in that way, your idea about devotion is good, because that not only sweetens the pot, but it can also play a great part in helping the other yogas to fructify, the yogas of meditation and the yogas of wisdom and the yogas of action.
Thank you, Bob.
Hello, Ramya.
Namaskar.
You're back. I can see you.
Actually, I have 2 questions coming in my manas and vrittis, and all the time it is contemplatively in a mood of contemplation lately. My first question is, about the Tan mantras. So as I go step by step of the subtle Tan mantras into the gross Panchakaranas, outside, in to out, and outward to in my body, inside my deha. I have this question is arising in my manas, in my mind, about the yamas and the niyamas, which can they contribute some part of their contribution in this, what I am doing. Also, you mentioned about samavaya, this word. Can you define that and talk about it to me?
Samanvaya, you said?
Yes.
Yeah, there are many words that start with some, like samapati or
That is contributing to the 10 yamas and the niyamas. Sama, S-A-M-A-V-A-M-A-Y. Actually, S-A-M-A-Y-V-A-Y-A. It's a Sanskrit word, I think. And you also have mentioned in your books, one of your books, this is a conjunction. It's helping to be with my practice of yamas and the niyamas, vows. I would say the vows of the yamas and the niyamas. Can you talk about it a little bit more? I would.
Well, I'm not sure now of the word you're talking about, because there's no yama or niyama called sama, or samanvaya. Samanvaya means to bring everything together.
Yeah, samavaya.
To bring everything together, to integrate everything nicely. Like the way Sri Ramakrishna did with all the religions of the world. They call that Samanvaya Mahacharya. The great teacher came, showed everyone how to bring all the religions together into one religion. That's called Samanvaya Mahacharya, the great teacher. But I'm not quite sure if you're talking about bringing all the yamas and niyamas together to help you. Is that what you're saying? To help you? Yeah, they definitely will help you in case of even becoming aware of the Tan mantras, the subtle essences of things. As I wrote you that email, I think the other day in answer to that, and told you that it's like coming from the basement up the steps, going to the top floor. You just follow a staircase and you go from one level to another level of the house. That's sort of like taking stock of your 5 elements around you. Fire is there in the kitchen, and light is in the kitchen. Those are all forms of fire. And earth is there in the kitchen, and water's there in the spigot, and air is all around you breathing. And so these are things that we don't really, well, you can take for granted or not take stock of. Taking for granted sometimes is, of course, a matter of forgetfulness, but taking stock is a matter of discipline. So you want to practice mindfulness, as they say, or conscious life, then it'd be like becoming aware of every breath is becoming aware of air, and becoming aware of water being sacred when you drink it, or purifying it would be becoming aware of the sacredness in the elements. If you had impure water, you know, it could have been sterilized or run through the water system, and they use fluorides and different things like that to make water pure. So it's really not pure, is it? But the real impure water is in your mind. It's you've taken the idea of water and made it impure. So you have to correct that in the mind first, and then consider all the elements around you. You have to sort of render them pure. That's what you do in a puja with everything. You know, it has impurities attached to it, the articles, the elements, the flowers,
Yes.
everything came out of nature is not really come out of nature pure. So you have to purify it in certain ways. So I'm just using that as an example here of the senses having the power to cognize the elements in them. The indriyas, they're called wisdom senses or cognitive senses. And so when they attach to the object, the eyes attach to, they see light, or they see water, or they see fire, or when the nose smells aromas and so forth, and breathes air, then that's a matter of what they call that's another Sama word actually. It's called conjunctions, natural conjunctions of things. And that's an ancient Vedic teaching, natural conjunctions.
Yeah.
And so those connections have been lost. So you remake them in your mind.
Yes.
You know, so at least in your mind, if not in other minds, everything is connected now. It's all integrated. It's synthesized. You see, and so yeah, just like that, you know, you're bringing two together into one thing. And then from that, you begin to get rasa, you know, from the relationships between the senses and the objects. You get great, more exquisite pleasure. Your eyes, you get more pleasure out of what you see. You get more pleasure out of what you taste and what you touch and what you smell. And that enlivens everything. Everything around you, your senses are enlivened. And then it's connected to the actual attributes of the senses, like the power of the eye to see, the power of the tongue to taste, power of the ear to hear. The power of the ear to hear is actually the most powerful of those. But those are three things that, like three floors that you stack together.
And one more
And
thing.
you can now, and let me finish, because now you can move between those three stairs, you know, without tripping on the stairs or falling down them. And you can also hold them in your mind as one triple tiered reality, aspect of reality. So now then you can get to the tanmatras from which all of these came, the essences of, you know, because the power of the eyes to see is an Indra, is a god. Indra means God. So the senses are actually little gods. They're wisdom gods. And you're blocking, because people's relationship with objects has become impure, then they're blocking the power of those gods to manifest themselves. And these gods can even get pissed off at you for doing that, cause you all sorts of problems in the senses, you see. And then emotions come from that, for instance, and, you know, all sorts of degraded things. And so anyway, I'm saying that that's a kind of, you might call that, you know, another Yoga 101 course. That people should put aside Hatha, forget about that for now, and do this Yoga 101 connections, and they'll find out that they can get to these, they can lift off these obsessions with grosser things easier. They won't have to really practice detachment anymore, because it'll be a natural inward ascension that they're going through.
I understand. It's very clear. And also, can I be aware of my dream and waking, dream and sleep, deep sleep?
that's very much connected to what is just being said, but it's at a much deeper and higher level that happens. You're jumping from a yoga 101 teaching to Advaita Vedanta is what you're doing there. You're going right to the way non-dualism in Vedanta at least would look at how to do Samanvaya. I mean, you want to put together your waking with your dream and your dreaming with your deep sleep. That's going to encompass a lot more than just the senses and the objects and the tanmatras. That's at a very high level of mind that you're doing that, and you're bringing together whole worlds, lotuses, chakras, and everything that's in the philosophy, sort of in one fell swoop when you think that way. When you in Advaita, you make sure to connect that to the word Om, because A means your waking state, and U means your dreaming state, and M means your deep sleep state. So the ancient rishis told us, like Pippalada said, if people come here into the physical body and they don't connect their waking to their dreaming to their deep sleep. In other words, they don't know that their soul came out of deep sleep and then came into dream and then came into waking. And we do that every 24 hours. But what he's talking about is every lifetime. So you have a deep sleep that you have a subtle body in that has seeds in it. And you'll bring that when you want to manifest yourself in a physical body, then you'll bring your seeds out of that causal realm, out of formlessness into form. That's dreaming. And that's also heaven, the heavens, right? So you're in heavens for a while. You become aware of forms in heaven, celestials, angels, gods, goddesses, ancestors, whatever level of heaven you're in. And then you're headed toward the mother's womb. And so then you're coming into the waking state. So all of this has to do with the word, right? The word is through everything, A-U-M. It's permeating everything. In the beginning was the word, Jesus was trying to tell John. So you're bringing everything up in the reverse order from M to U to A. But when you get to A and you're born in the physical world, and as I was saying earlier, if you don't keep this Dharma with you, these teachings with you, then you quickly forget U and M. You forget. Even though you see people die during your life, you think they're gone, or your ancestors aren't there anymore, or your father and mother are gone or something. You have all these misconceptions about it, and so you're quickly losing the connection between your waking and your dreaming state, and dreams then become something that are just fantasies or meaningless to people, except when extremely powerful one happens, and whether it's positive or negative, a great vision and dream, that's called svapna siddha, or a nightmare called hell. So those things are happening to people randomly. But if you come to earth and you have your wisdom intact, and you think, you might as well, when you go to sleep tonight, take your mantra with you, you see, and say, well, okay, I'm going to heaven now. You might as well just tell your wife, your husband, your children, say, okay, I'm going to heaven now. And you go into dream, because that's where heaven is. But you've lost that connection between earth and heaven, between yourself and your ancestors, and between yourself and the gods. What to speak of yourself and Brahman, your higher self. So these are avenues that have become, or channels that have become filled in, and nobody travels along them anymore. The yogis call them nadis, they're passageways into consciousness, and they become filled in, and nobody can go along them anymore. The trail has closed up. See? Not only for you, but for a whole 7 billion people have closed the trail, and a few hundred are still walking it. That's how bad it's gotten in the Kali Yuga, at least. So the import of keeping Jagrat, Swapna, and Sushupti, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep in mind as you, because you're going between them every night, every day. You're moving. Your consciousness is moving like 3 tiers of a house. You're actually doing it every breath. When you breathe in, you hold, and you breathe out. That's also waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. It's also creation, preservation, and destruction. And so it's a very beautiful, on a philosophical level, it's a very profound teaching to contemplate. All right, so I think that's the time I have to give today to 2 satsangs I got to give. I'm so fortunate and so happy that I had 2 levels of students coming and listening to the Dharma and sharing with me. So thank you all. Join us for live streaming class tomorrow on Viveka, if you can, 4-class series each Sunday. And then otherwise, look into the new website again. Join. Read all the wisdom that's being posted there. I'm up there every day, putting more and more up there for you to study and see. And also next Saturday, join us again for this across the world satsang that we have, a good 10, 20 people involved in, if not more, off and on. Anything to end with, Annapurna?
Yes, I just wanted to say that the time zone changes have been a little bit difficult to figure out. So just know that the base time is 8 o'clock in the morning, Hawaii, and then figure out your times from there, okay? So for satsang, 8 o'clock in Hawaii in the morning. And for the live stream class, 2:30 p.m. Hawaii, and figure out your time from there, okay?
All right. Aloha, everyone. Namaste.
Stay.
Namaste. Thank you.
Hey,
Namaste.
Babaji, thank you for the teaching.
Sharanam Babaji.